you're the director of the Center for Global Dialogue, and you recently said about the Orlando mass shooting is a tragic atrocity that is, at the very least, partially attributable to the multiple fundamentalisms spawned by the political maneuverings of Washington and its moderate fundamentalist allies in the Muslim world, particularly Saudi Arabia. While it is still too soon to determine the veracity of the narratives around the shooter's motives and recent behavior, even if we accept some version of it, it is a tragic amalgamation of the systematic pathologies of our time, fundamentalist-inspired hatred of the other, in this case homosexuals, and militarized terrorizing violence conducted wholesale by states and retail by private non-state actors. Whether or not mental illness contributed to the shooting, it is incontrovertible that these tragic cases have nothing to do with religion per se, but deeper contemporary processes that have fueled violence at home and abroad with guns, bombs, and drones that have caused countless nameless victims in places like Iraq, Afghanistan, becoming so commonplace. And I've interviewed you've been interviewed by me on this show before, so thank you and welcome back.
That's right. It's great to be back.
So yeah, this, it really is horrible tragedy. And then they just like an update is that the shooter, Mr. Omar Mateen, I believe is his name, was a frequenter of the club there.
Right. Now we have that information as well.
And so, so talk a bit about what do you think, or I mean, like what, like the paragraph that I just read, if you could sort of elaborate on like what created this.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think that, there's been attempts to constantly speak, and bring religion, Islam, ISIS, all of this into the picture when, we've seen these types of incidences of mass violence, mass shootings taking place in this country routinely now over the past few years without any sense of kind of how to deal with this here at home, and how it has nothing to do with the religious background or orientation of the person, but the culture of violence that is generally spread in this society and has been exported horrifically abroad to what I said, through the wars and occupations and invasions. And so one of the points that we have to address is how these systems of oppression and hierarchy are creating these, conditions of social alienation that these individuals develop. We don't know much. We're still kind of learning, but mental illness, you and I have been discussing for a while, is going to become widespread when you have these institutionalized systemic structures constantly inculcating these ideologies of hate and violence and so forth. So these things should be expected and has nothing to do with the emergence of groups like ISIS, which of course, is part of it in the sense that it is a product of the fundamentalist regime that has actually been supported by our government, first and foremost, Saudi Arabia. But of course, we will not go there and won't address the larger kind of root causes of this, and either hold Islam responsible or just the individual as just some nutcase, rather than the systems around them which continue to produce these types of horrible tragedies.
I wanted to discuss a little bit about there's recent articles. Let's see, a 2014 study. I mean, I'm just throwing this out there just for because I mean, I've done shows on this. The no separate justice vigils that they have in Lower Manhattan every the first Monday of the month. They bring this stuff up. They actually know people who have it happen to. And on Democracy Now!, Amy Goodman has talked about the Duca brothers being set up by the FBI. I mean, there are numerous stories spoken about how a vulnerable, mentally ill people get actually targeted and helped. Let me see. So there's Inventing Terrorists, the Lawfare of Preventative Prosecution by Project Salam and the National Coalition to Protect Civil Freedoms, found that almost every domestic terrorist plot from 2001 until 2010 was in some way cooked up or assisted and eventually busted, in quotes, by the FBI. The report analyzed about 400 domestic terror cases and found that only 4 cases were initiated or driven out without the encouragement of the Bureau.
That's right. No, and these cases of entrapment of individuals, particularly in the Muslim community, and is very similar to kind of what happened in the 1960s with COINTELPRO and the Black Civil Rights Movement and the Black Power movement. This is, of course, widespread and now has been widely documented. And I think the behavior of large parts of the FBI with regard to this has been totally discredited. And the individuals that they have gotten, have been shown to kind of been basically lured into doing all types of things. And it wasn't kind of their natural inclination necessarily to do things or to actually just be framed for doing things. So there is definitely that history here as well that should be taken seriously. And the sad part about it is many of these individuals in the first place need serious, help and counseling with regards to the situations and the larger, social injustices and inequalities and marginalization that they are confronting. Instead, they are, entrapped and encouraged to be either informants or engage in certain types of behavior, so on and so forth. And so they're put further into these types of situations. Of course, none of this is to justify, this guy or any other person undertaking these horrible atrocities against innocent civilians. It is just to say that we are a society that constantly fails to look at what is producing and how politicians and rulers contribute to this climate of hatred, fear, and violence. Both at home and abroad. We continue to refuse to address those issues, and we just throw our arms up in the air, and it's very convenient every single time to say, well, this is Islam, Muslims, ISIS, whatever else, and just have historical amnesia about what what our government's been up to domestically and abroad in creating these conditions.
I mean, I find it really ironic and so ridiculously hypocritical, for Obama to be getting up and talking about the tragedy of the Orlando shooting, like when this guy has millions of innocent people killed all over the world, in the Middle East, and drone attacks in Syria. And
that's right. Whether it's Obama or Hillary, and especially, Trump and the right wing, when they're kind of crying over, the innocent gays and lesbians that have now been killed, in terms of homophobia, that is not a monopoly of the Muslim world or even the country of origin of this guy, Afghanistan. And the guy, of course, himself has lived in the U.S. all of his life. So, of course, the homophobia was not, in him through some Islamic institution, because he pretty much had no association with anything you could even remotely call Islamic. So that is a very homegrown phenomena that is deep homophobia. And other than that, the type of Islamophobia that's being peddled, not just, of course, most visibly by Trump, but even liberal Islamophobia. So, these things will result in these types of acts of violence. And again, the inability to see how that both the rhetoric, the ideology, and the practices of this government enables these conditions where, many more individuals will go cuckoo and engage in these types of actions. And mass mental health issues are ubiquitous. They are all over the place. And we refuse to link them with the type of social conditions that are being created here and abroad.
And the unfortunate thing too is that, right, it's the system that creates people to be mentally ill. And,
right.
And then, of course, it isn't going to help. It's going to just exploit and, use for whatever, purposes or whatever agenda
exactly.
that's going to just, keep the cash flowing, unfortunately.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's really, I can't even, sometimes think of words to describe, just poor people. The most vulnerable people that grow up in horrible conditions, that are in desperate need of help. And
That's
instead
right.
of getting help, they just get exploited.
Right. That's right. And, and in this case, the idea, again, coming back, because a lot of the noise is now being made about, whether they say ISIS or Islam, it's, kind of the implication is the same. This type of, this is uniquely Muslim behavior, right? The homophobia and beyond that, the sexism, the misogyny, etc. The point that we really need to hit home, and for all of the listeners to know, is that, all of our religious traditions and even secular traditions, they have histories of conservative orthodoxy supporting some type of, homophobia, sexism. That's there to be found. But the type of militant, violent fundamentalism that has been imposed in the Muslim world is a very common phenomena, and it happened, over the past few decades, beginning with the global jihad supported by the entire Western political establishment against the godless commies in Afghanistan, against the Soviet Union, continued to this present day, in Libya and Syria now, and you then, claim that you have no idea where this type of hate-filled ideology and the accompanying horrible practices come from. We know absolutely where they come from. It's just, you're absolutely right. It's about big oil companies. It's about the profitable relationship with the most fundamentalist regime on the planet, that's Saudi Arabia. And that's what it's about, and that's what has enabled all of this to take place. But we will not look at that, and we will continue to just say that, this is just about this abstract thing known as Islam, or, we know exactly what is enabling this and what has caused even, the Muslim world to confront ideologies and practices which are, which have had deadly consequences for Muslims, and that have been imposed from abroad.
I want to kind of sort of direct who I feel like I want to direct this show to is not the people at the very bottom who kind of know this stuff because they experience it, and
right.
Not the people kind of who are working for it, and they know it too because they're either working for it or they're sort of benefiting well, I hesitate to use that word benefiting, but it's the people kind of in the middle who are, I guess, neutral, who I really want to sort of focus on to get them, to realize what's going on and to, because I mean,
absolutely.
There seems.
I mean, you've done a phenomenal job consistently. I listen to you all the time, and it's always a pleasure being with you. But it's our analyses are political and so on. Of course, we have to pay attention to the complexities and the nuances. But at the end of the day, your listeners know that there are very, very simple things at play right now that we need to oppose, and those are the way the arms industry, big oil companies, all of these various big interests in this country are determining the actions of our government with regard, particularly to the Muslim world, but throughout the world, and these are the predictable consequences of those policies. So, like ordinary Americans, we want to kind of reach out to and try to convince. That is the point to hit home. That these are governments that we have relationships with, that we are supporting, whether they're Saudi Arabia, Israel, so on and so forth, that are involved in horrendous atrocities, that are involved in supporting and advancing the most reactionary fundamentalist causes in that part of the world. And so these are the predictable consequences of those policies. So if you want to see changes, you have to oppose our government's relationships with these countries, arming them to the teeth, and funding them and supporting them and keeping them in power. And we have to oppose what our government does domestically in terms of marginalizing, impoverishing our communities even further and working for the rich.
Just before you came on, I spoke to Carl Dix, who's in Baltimore, trying to, the third cop charged in the death of Freddie Gray trial is in progress. And, of course, it looks like he is going to get away with it also. And he... I was asking, because this is the third, cop that it looks like is going to get acquitted. And I asked him in the previous two, when the previous two cops, were let off and acquitted, were there as much uprisings going on down there as had happened when, right after the death of Freddie Gray. And he said that, people are angry and there's some, but the attitude is, people are almost like resolved to, just this is the way it is. I mean, it's kind of like this gigantic abusive relationship, and you're over there like trying to, empower, someone or people who have been in an abusive situation, an abusive relationship for, decades, and they're just so, used to it, and so, being into submission, it really, it does take a lot of, inflating and pumping up of people, to keep that going, because it's, I mean, I struggle with it myself.
That's right. No, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's absolutely no difference between. Hello?
Yeah,
So there's absolutely no difference between, at a very personal level, the type of abusive, hierarchical, dominating relationship that we experience, and the way that our rulers behave with regard to us as ordinary people, as ordinary citizens. And that's what we have to understand and unpack. That it is in that relationship of power and domination that we continue to suffer at their hands. And this is what the Black Lives Movement has responded to, kind of decades and centuries, in fact, of that type of relationship of the system, and particularly the system of white supremacy with regard to non-white and particularly Black people in this country. And so we have to understand it as these relationships of abuse, of power, of hierarchy and privilege that enables some to oppress others. And that with regard to whether that's with regard to kind of Muslims in this country right now, people of color, and gays and women and so on. This is the kind of the logic of the abuse of power. And actually, you're absolutely right. It's very, very tough to undo that because of its often centuries, millennia of institutionalization. But it's through consciousness raising of these systems of hierarchy, privilege, and abuse that we can actually change things. There's no doubt about there's a lot of anger in this country and throughout the world, I may add, at the way things are. The problem often becomes, as you very well know, is that we don't direct that anger and channel it in a political direction, even in a personal direction, that can actually liberate us, which is why then the characters like Trump can come and channel a lot of that anger into support for them, for this charismatic, crazy individual. So this is what we need to focus on, that the anger is very legitimate of people in this country, but how to kind of politically direct that in a way that actually liberates us and doesn't further oppress us or keep us in those oppressive conditions.
I wanted to refer listeners to look up the story of the Duca brothers. The Intercept actually has a lengthy article, and they also have the short documentary on what happened to them called Entrapped, a film by Razan Galini, which so also let me also just refer to a report by the Center for Human Rights and Global Justice and the International Human Rights Clinic in 2012 also studied the use of sting operations and asserted that the government's use of intrusive surveillance, untrained paid informants, and manufactured terrorism plots raises serious human rights concerns that must immediately be addressed. While outrage has rightly been focused on Donald Trump's Islamo-racist rants, attention should also be paid to the Bush and Obama administration's long-running counterterrorism policies that fan the flames of bigotry. The use of paid informants to entrap and demonize vulnerable members of the Muslim community has been a centerpiece of the FBI's war on terror since 9/11, and it works well for them. Each plot they foil is a feather in their cap, but it also boosts the number of terror plots that are supposedly threatening the homeland.
That's right. Absolutely. No, this is, like I was saying earlier, this is a pattern that has continued to take place, and it's been so counterproductive. And all of the research and the studies have demonstrated that all of these kind of FBI investigations and plots haven't been able to do anything. And in fact, as we pointed out earlier, often it's a form of entrapment and luring into kind of more craziness on the part of certain individuals from Muslim communities and other communities as well. And so, that entire domestic operation is totally discredited. And now we have programs known as CVE, Countering Violent Extremism. Again, none of this getting to the heart of the matter, none of this actually forcing people in power to see how the peddling of more and more Islamophobia, fear and hatred of Muslims, a large number, millions who are in this country living peacefully, coexisting mutually with their neighbors, so on and so forth. How it's actually creating even worsening conditions for them, how it's making them even more miserable living here, trying their best to cope in these conditions in which they don't know whether they are safe when they walk outside, and how people are looking at them all the time because of, again, the Islamophobia being peddled in this country. Beyond that, the ongoing systems of kind of patriarchy, sexism, and so on. These things will produce these types of reactions, and often if we don't see them here, trust me, they are happening abroad because of the large-scale violence that's exported there. Throughout the Middle East right now. The Muslim world really does have a right to think that this whole kind of war on terrorism and U.S. foreign policy is basically just about one thing, and that's a war on Islam. Because if you look at all the countries kind of invaded and occupied and so on, they've been Muslim countries. And so Muslims globally really, they are very frustrated with the way things are going. And in addition to that, as I was saying, the support for these regimes in their countries, horrible authoritarian, dictatorial regimes that oppress their own people. All of this doesn't fly too well with Muslims throughout the world.
I wanted to bring up something that Carl Dick said. Like, he mentioned Muhammad Ali and his refusal to go to Vietnam and kill people that, did not call him nigger. And how, in his death, upon his death, how everybody is like, Muhammad Ali was the greatest, but yet don't really espouse to, the other fight that Muhammad Ali had with the United States government when he refused to go to Vietnam. And, I believe that that's exactly how, we're supposed to live, like the way Muhammad Ali lived, because when you work for the system and depend on the system for kind of, just a job or a paycheck, instead of being more like him, kind of, just unique. I always thought, that's the way we're supposed to live. We're supposed to be unique people. You're supposed to bring your, I believe in self-actualization. People are supposed to be empowered. You're supposed to be just a unique person that brings your gifts and talents to the world. And not just have a job and sort of be like a cog in the wheel. And
that's right.
Because where that is taking people is in the direction of being forced to then oppress other people so that you can then have a paycheck. If you're a Muhammad Ali and you're making your own rules, you don't have to play by the rules of the system. You can tell the system, that's right, I'm not going and fighting your wars. And I mean, to me, that's exactly what made that guy really great.
Absolutely. I think Rabbi Michael Lerner at his memorial service said it best. The best way to honor and celebrate Muhammad Ali is to be Muhammad Ali today in responding to the policies of the U.S. government domestically and abroad. And, his passing away is just a great example of how power attempts to co-opt individuals who were very much opposed to everything that the powerful were doing. But they want to try to co-opt that legacy. But he is someone that is very difficult too, because you just have to read or listen to his comments and statements, every single one of them, to know how much of an opponent he was to the system of oppression that existed, and specifically the Vietnam War at that time, and of course the way African Americans were treated in this country. So, that is basically, the lesson for people. I mean, if we needed something to kind of, kick us in the butt and remind us about what we needed to be doing right now, it is, Muhammad Ali passed away, and that's really sad, but it should move us. It should inspire us to remember precisely the oppositional position that he had towards all of these horrible, horrific, and oppressive policies that our government was undertaking, and that today we need to respond in the same way and not allow the politicians of both, the Democrats and the Republicans to mobilize anger at the way things are, at these types of horrible atrocities like the one that took place in Orlando, to not capitalize on those tragedies to further their own agendas, which will only keep us oppressed and shackled as slaves of the system, as you correctly point out.
So, right, again, kind of directing my comments to the sort of neutral people that are not really feeling the sting of being oppressed by the system, and in my opinion, I think most people really are being oppressed by the system, because the people that don't think that they're being oppressed by the system don't feel it only because they're not trying to reach their full level of power. If you try to reach your full level of power, believe you me, you are going to go right up against it, and you're going to feel it really, really bad. It's the most vulnerable, the poor, the marginalized people that feel it being kept down.
That's right.
And right. So again, it's the sort of neutral people, because the bottom line is you're supposed to, if people looked at things in terms of the fact that you're supposed to reach your full level of power, and how many people are doing that. And, again, so it's the people that kind of, stay at that, comfortable place of maybe they're making decent money and their jobs aren't so miserable. I mean, I don't really know what, but I mean, there are definitely a large sum of the population that seem pretty content because they're not stepping up and resisting the system. They're not kind of taking a stand against what's going on and what's happening to the vulnerable, the marginalized, the mentally ill, the young black and brown people that are just being massively incarcerated for profit. And the people in places like Gaza, Syria, Afghanistan.
That's right. Absolutely. That's absolutely the case. That it requires kind of an understanding that if you allow the status quo to persist, it will only entrench its power and domination further and further. And at this point in time, where it's very, very clear that you are confronting multiple crises at so many different levels. Whether it's in this country, there's a real serious, what we can call, we like to talk about countries out there in the third world as being having democracy deficits and we have a serious democracy deficit here in which the opinions and the input of ordinary people are clearly not reflected in the policies that the government and the rulers undertake. So we have a serious issue of political and democratic deficit in this country. There's the economic and financial crisis, which continues to kind of impoverish the majority and enrich the few. We have the ecological crisis. We continue to adopt and undertake policies which will only guarantee the further erosion of our ecosystem and the eventual destruction of our planet, possibly. So we are on this kind of suicidal mission in terms of, I mean, other species have already been so devastated by what we've been doing, but even for the human species, it seems almost like a suicidal path that we're on. We have that, and then at the very heart of it, there's whether you look at it in secular or faith-based terms, there's a profound crisis of the human, of kind of what it means to be a human being in the world today.
Yeah.
And so that's, I think, a question that we need to ask in terms of what is our responsibility as humans on this planet and as accountable to each other, or whether to some higher power, whatever have you. How are we behaving as human beings? So there's a profound kind of human, moral, spiritual crisis at the heart of it as well, that is related to all of these other crises, and that produces what we were talking about earlier, then a situation where so many people find themselves helpless, mentally ill, so on and so forth, abused, as you put it correctly. They feel abused because they are.
I think that we should include the the human relate, like the way that humans, the way the powers that be, and just the way humans relate to each other in general should also be kind of put into the same category as environmental devastation, because I mean, you can't abuse and pollute and destroy the planet without also doing it to yourself and others. And I mean, I kind of, that's sort of like been my focus all of my life, was trying to bring focus to the way that we treat each other, and we need to treat each other like so much better. I mean, because families are again today on Democracy Now! And talking about the Orlando shooting, she had a journalist who did an article for Rolling Stone magazine, and the history of domestic violence, and how shooters, there's always like some history of domestic violence, and that these
Right.
are the issues that I've been trying to bring to light for decades. I mean, since the 70s, about the family, the breakdown of the family system. People are not on each other's side. I mean,
That's right.
I don't know. Like, to me, it's so simple. I mean, everything is like right in front of your face,
Right.
and the way, like it's so obvious that it's so unhealthy. It's not
Right.
the way that nature is meant to function. The way that we treat each other, and the fact that right, like parents can't really empower and raise their children to be their unique, full talented self, and then which keeps people dependent on the system for the rest of their lives, and then that's
right.
The system just turns into like this large, abusive, dysfunctional family. I mean,
Exactly, and we are essentially forced to sell ourselves and our bodies and so on and so forth, the systems which will continue to abuse it. I mean, you're absolutely right. Because of the destruction of our families and our communities, whether you, believe in kind of, whether it's a nuclear family, communities, extended, and whatever you consider to be your family in that sense, and that people can have very expansive and different and alternative notions. There is no doubt, whatever you define that as, they have been actively undermined and destroyed and devastated by the systems of hierarchy and oppression around us, and they are not able to have sustainable, healthy relationships within them because of these systems at play. And that's what we need to try to recover. I mean, it is essentially about trying to recover a spirit of healthy living within your immediate family, extended, your communities. That's what's been lost. We actually don't know how to behave in ways which are healthy anymore with each other, because the system doesn't allow it. The Lao is a system that wants one allegiance from the individual, and that's to the system itself, and to be its slave, and refuses to allow any competition in terms of the love that we want to give to anyone else.
So, I just always thought that if people focused on health and just being as, healthy, mentally, physically fit and balanced as they could possibly be, then
Right.
we could literally just take our power back from the, sociopaths that be, because
Right.
it's the fact that the people are just so willing to accept living only so much, only so powerful instead of their full level of power, that it empowers the sociopaths to use your rightful amount of power and then use it against you. I mean, it's kind of like basic physics, really,
Exactly. No, it's the cycle. It's a pattern. It's a cycle of constantly re-empowering the exactly as you put it, the sociopaths that oppress us in the first place. And there's the need to kind of liberate ourselves from enabling that cycle of violence and oppression that takes place. The violence in a very kind of material, but also the symbolic violence of day-to-day life, of being basically slaves in a system over which we have no control. So, I mean, I just wanted to say now that, it's very inspiring to hear you say these things. And I think that when you speak about centering our health and the way we live and our relationships and learning once again how to have a healthy relationship with others and oneself, I think centering that as part of our discourse, right? I mean, and knowing that our politics will emerge from that, from taking care of ourselves. A decent progressive politics will emerge only when we know how to do that. I think that that's a very important point that often even many progressives forget about when they want to jump straight to kind of some type of political trajectory without understanding how the self and the soul needs to also undergo significant healing in this process in order to channel our energies in decent political directions.
Exactly. It's it's the reason why I called this organic news is kind of for that reason. It's, most people just, and I know it's too late for a lot of people who are just, too used to whatever, working their job or just working for money or something like that. And they're not about to change.
Right.
But I mean, anybody out there that, I mean, young people, older people, anybody, just start coming together. I mean, just like, community, take power away. Like, we need to really like slow this system down that just, because we really are just peddling a system that is destroying us. I mean, it's that simple.
Absolutely.
So thank you so very, very much, JUNAID Ahmad, and you're the director of the Center for Global Dialogue. So people can just look up the Center for Global Dialogue and find your writing.
That's right.
And you've also been Secretary General of JUST International, the international movement to create a just world. And you're on the faculty of Advanced Studies at the University of Management Technology and on the faculty of Law and Policy at the Lahore University of Management Sciences. Thank you so much.
That's right. Wonderful to be with you again. And I look forward to always listening to your shows and to keeping sustaining the relationship with you and the many others that believe in this process of healing ourselves so that we can radically transform the systems of hierarchy and oppression that keep us so enslaved by the system. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much, Junaid. Good night.
Bye-bye.
I have like another minute. I'm going to just play a minute of Entrapped about the Duca brothers, the Fort Dix Five, and it's on the Intercept website. So again, thank you for tuning in to this Tuesday, June 14th. I am Catherine Waters. April Waters is my YouTube channel. Please support on the Awake Radio, where the podcasts can be found. It's Awake Radio and the number 1 with no spaces. My podcasts are there with a link to support, and we really do need it and appreciate it. Thank you so much, and speak truth to power. Good night.